How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Rishon. Although it's dark here, really it's already Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Excuse me. Steven in New Hampshire, Shandora in the Bronx, Tom in Pennsylvania, Carla in Brazil, Paula is listening, Bella in Florida, Paula's got some nice emojis, Jonathan in Southern California, David in South Bend, Indiana, Sharon in Massachusetts. Wait, why does it keep skipping on me? Sharon in Massachusetts, not in New Jersey, right? Maybe you're visiting your family. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida says, I was talking to my mother and now more than ever, I am super proud of my Sephardic Jewish side. Baruch Hashem. Amen. Randy in Florida. Tom, sorry about the Giants yesterday. Sorry about the whole season, Tom. Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Karen in Northern California, Joseph in Massachusetts, Lucy in Minnesota, Marjorie says hello, Ella says hello, Frank in San Pedro, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida. Welcome everybody, great to have you with us. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by our very own Stephen Giguere. In honor of June Talisman. May you both, you and June, be showered in blessings and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. And Stephen, thank you so much for supporting Accidental Talmudist and enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And truly, more than ever. Now, more than ever. We definitely need your help to finish the app, get it launched, keep operations running, keep the lights on, as it were, at Accidental Talmudist. The link is donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. We need your help. It's a nonprofit. There's a lot of things we do. We put out a lot of content, 400 videos last year, 100 short Torah articles, plus the table for five, plus all the humor. And the humor got us these, sizable audiences on TikTok and Instagram. If you're not following Accidental Talmudist or Salvador Litvak and you're on those platforms, come check it out. But grew the audience with the humor and now have been sharing Torah and some thoughts about Israel as well on those platforms and has met with so much support. From a Torah perspective, so many people support what we're saying about the state of Israel and this defensive war. And, of course, a lot of hate has come our way. We're not going to let that stop us from doing the work that we do. And really, it's such important work in this time. We believe with all our heart and with all our soul that the more Torah people are learning, the more mitzvahs people are doing, the sooner peace will come in Israel and around the world. It's so beautiful that we have so many non-Jews learning with us, and we've been able to teach about the Noahide laws, right? That is the path that non-Jews take to add to the peace of Israel. And as we've taught many times, right, they're not so simple, right? The 7 Noahide laws, they're more like categories of laws. And, not blaspheming God, not cursing God requires some knowledge of God through Torah. And we're so glad that everyone is here learning today. We're so glad people are learning with us and that all the various kinds of content we put out. And please, put in some of your hard-earned tithing dollars toward Accidental Talmudist at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Okay. We are opening a new chapter 5 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. And the first Mishnah number 1, talks about a tom, an innocuous ox that gored and killed a cow. And then we're going to look at vice versa, where the cow kills the ox. And that reminded me right away that we had a question, was it yesterday or the day before? So the word that we keep using in Hebrew is shor, the shor, right? These are the laws, the halachas of the shor. which we're translating into English as an ox. Now, normally when you're talking in English and you're distinguishing an ox from a bull, so what you're talking about, right, is that the bull is the male bovine. I believe cow is just kind of a more plain English word for a bovine, and a cow can be male or female, right? In English, let me know if I'm wrong about that. But I believe a cow is more the species, right? And a heifer is a female and a bull is a male. And a bull is distinguished from an ox in the sense that the ox is castrated so that it is less rambunctious and more willing to do the work of plowing, etc. When we're talking about cattle, right? When we're talking, they're just going to be slaughtered for eating. Probably not going to bother to castrate them. But ox, right, usually in English has that connotation of being gelded, right, being castrated so that its manner is more docile and controllable. And so we thought, well, perhaps in Hebrew it means the same thing. But right away we run into this difficulty that the Torah prohibits Jews from castrating their animals. So I looked this up. There's an article on Or Sameach about this. And believe it or not, there's multiple views on this subject, as almost everything in the tradition. And the idea actually is, so a par and a para, right? That's the more generic word for a bovine, right? The male bovine is the par, the female is the para. So like a heifer, we talk about the red heifer as the para aduma. A young cow, a calf, male is an egel, female is an egla. So what is the shor? Is it indeed a castrated bull, a castrated par? Or is it simply one that has been trained to pull the plow, but, still has its parts, as it were? And the prevailing view seems to be that, I don't know about prevailing view, but there's definitely two views. That one is shor does mean that it was castrated, perhaps, was purchased from a non-Jew, castrated so that the Jew did not castrate the cow. But presumably the Jew owns a lot of, a lot of oxen that are used for plowing. And they breed, and he might want to have some more. Then what's he going to do? He can't hire a non-Jew to do something that the Jew is prohibited to do. And so there's definitely a strong viewpoint that no, the shor simply means a bull that will accept the yoke and pull the plow, as it were. Perhaps it's older, perhaps, it's less rambunctious, perhaps it was trained, perhaps it was bred to be a little bit more docile, but it is not a castrated bull. Right? So, and particularly now when we're talking about one that gores, and that's why this question came up, right? If the idea is that you castrate it so it won't do things like gore other animals and people, it's surprising that there's so much of a body of law around the goring ox, right? Now it makes more sense, according to this latter view, that the shor refers to one that is trained to pull the plow, but has not been castrated, has not been gelded. And so we understand perhaps a little bit better why, it would come up. It's still unusual, right? It's definitely not the normal thing that your ox that you're using to pull your wagon or your plow will turn out to be a goring ox. And, this was an agricultural society where oxen were used with tremendous frequency, and so they couldn't have this problem all the time. It's more like, well, when the problem came up, this is how we deal with it. So I thought you'd enjoy a little bit of background on that. By the way, there's a couple of other words in Hebrew for the bovine. One is the aleph, and that's interesting because it's almost the same word as the first letter of the alphabet. That's not a coincidence, right? So the aleph, when we're talking about the aleph, this is like the prize bull or the prize ox, large, right? The one in charge. And the same word gets used as an aluf for a chief, an actual human chief. Same word as this kind of, big prize ox or prize bull, as it were. And it's also, and so when is a chief considered a chief? When he has 1,000 people to lead, and 1,000 is elef, right? So also tied to aleph and aluf. And then the other word is bakar or bakar, and this is more in the context of a number of oxen, more like cattle, right? So especially when you're breeding them to slaughter them and sell the beef, then we're talking about bakar. And there's some speculation, by the way, that the shor in Hebrew becomes the tor in Aramaic and may have led to the Greek Taurus, right? And the word for bull in Greek that became part of the astrological signs. And that bakar, cattle, and who watches cattle? A boker. So a boker is one who investigates the welfare of the cattle. This is actually a cowboy, right? So a boker is basically a cowboy, a cowherd who watches the cattle and sort of investigates their welfare. And was interesting to me. Bikur cholim, right, which is the phrase that we use for the mitzvah of visiting the sick. I was able to do that today for a friend. You know what? It meant a lot to him. It meant a lot to me to be with him. And, people who are ill, they really, really appreciate and need you to visit them and to pay attention to them and inquire after their welfare. And that's what Bikur Cholim actually means. We translate it as visiting the sick, but Bikur is actually kind of investigating, going to see how they're doing. That's what you're doing. You're kind of investigating the sick, looking into their welfare when you go to visit them, just as the cowboy is always concerned with the welfare of the cattle. And that's why this word boker from bakar also has this connotation of investigating and looking into and making inquiry. Okay, that's what I've got from the language point of view today. Let's get back to the work. Page 46a, Mishnah number 1 in chapter 5. In the case of an innocuous ox that gored and killed a cow, and the cow's fetus was found dead at its side, and it is not known whether the cow gave birth before the ox gored it, and the fetus's death was unrelated to the goring, or whether it gave birth after the ox gored it, and the fetus died on account of the goring. So in this situation, the owner of the ox pays half the cost of the damage for the cow, right? An innocuous ox gored another animal, so whatever the amount of damage was, the injured party is entitled to half the damages because it was an innocuous ox without a history of goring. And you only have recourse to the body of the goring animal, right? Of the goring ox. So here, where there's this fetus found alongside the cow, and the question is, maybe it's a baby cow, let's say a baby calf. So did it give birth, and then both the mother and the fetus were killed, or did it give birth? I'm sorry. Did it give birth and it was a stillborn, and so the goring actually had nothing to do with the death of the fetus, or was the stillbirth a result of the goring, and therefore the goring led not only to the death of the mother but also to the death of the fetus? That's the uncertainty. So in that situation, the owner of the ox pays half the cost of the damage for the cow and 1/4 of the cost of the damage for the offspring of the cow. Why? Because it is uncertain whether the ox was responsible for the death of the fetus, in which case he would pay half the damages. And so therefore its owner pays only half the amount for the fetus that he would ordinarily be required to pay, and that means 1/4. And likewise, there is uncertainty in the case of an innocuous cow that gored an ox, right? So here I think the word cow is being used for heifer. So we're talking there about a female, right? And I know so little, and my city life is showing my ignorance. But I guess there are female bovines with horns that can gore and inflict damage. I'm sure there's many, and I apologize for being so ignorant. And likewise, there's uncertainty in the case of an innocuous cow, a para, right? So female cow, that gored. Could somebody just tell me, is when we're talking about a cow, does the word cow imply female? Or does the word cow imply the species and there are bulls and heifers within it? I should have looked that up in Webster's dictionary, but I hadn't done it yet. Okay, so there is uncertainty in the case of an innocuous cow that gored an ox, and the cow's newborn offspring was found at its side, dead or alive, and it is not known whether the cow gave birth before it gored the ox or whether the cow gave birth after it gored. When damage is caused by an innocuous animal, the liability of the owner is limited to the value of the animal that gored. Therefore, half the cost of the damage is paid from the value of the cow, as in the standard case of an innocuous animal that injures another. And if that does not suffice to pay for half the cost of the damage to the ox that was gored, then the injured party has recourse also to 1/4 of the cost of the damage that can be paid from the offspring, the dead fetus, the fetus of the cow. Since it is uncertain whether the offspring was part of the cow at the time that the cow gored, the owner pays only half of what he would pay if it were certain that it was part of the cow. Answer, Sal, a cow is the female of the species of cattle. Thank you for clarifying, and sorry to be so unknowing. Okay, but right, there are no stupid questions. The only stupid question is the one you didn't ask. There's so many things we don't know, and we should be quick to admit what we don't know, and I didn't know, and thank you, Bill. Okay, the Gemara on Mishnah number 1. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says this ruling in the Mishnah is the statement of Sumakos, who says property of uncertain ownership is divided by the two parties. But the rabbis say that this is the significant principle of monetary law. The burden of proof rests upon the claimant, and the disputed sum is not divided. According to the rabbis, in the cases of uncertainty in the Mishnah, no payment is made for the fetus or from the offspring, respectively, unless it can be proven what happened. Right? So that's a very important distinction. And you could see how, kind of like a rural, just kind of plain folks legal situation, right? There's some kind of a boss and two employees come and they say, this is my this is my lunch, and the other one says, no, that is my lunch, and the boss doesn't want to deal with it, and so the boss said, split the lunch, get out of my office, I don't want to deal with you guys. Right? So in a case of uncertainty, just split it. Two people are making a claim, just split it. That's what Sumakos says is what we do in a case of uncertainty. But the majority overrule Sumakos and say, no, that is not what we do. What we do is that the money that is in the hands of one party, and the other party is trying to extract money, right? A plaintiff in some kind of a lawsuit. And so the plaintiff is trying to extract money from the defendant. And we can't be sure what the facts were, right? This is a case where the uncertainty can't be resolved because there was no witness. And so in the case where there is uncertainty, the rabbis say the one who's trying to get money from the other guy has to make the case. He has to prove his point. If he proves it, he'll get, the full amount of what he's trying to get. And if he can't prove it, he gets nothing. We don't just split because there was uncertainty and it can't be known. The burden of proof rests on the plaintiff. Now, alternatively, And so in this case where, it would matter whether that stillborn or, that dead fetus that is along of the cow that is alongside the cow, either because the cow gored or because the cow was gored, and it's going to affect the amount of damages that are paid, but we cannot know if the fetus died as a result in the case of the cow, as is the victim of the goring. We don't know if the fetus was born and died before the goring happened, or if it died as a result of the goring. Right? Obviously, the horns didn't penetrate the fetus. We just don't know what happened. So we don't know. We cannot know. So the fetus is, we're going to just say it's because of the uncertainty, it's not going to be subject to paying the damages. And then what's so interesting is that in the case of the cow that gored the ox, right, and it was an innocuous cow, doesn't have a history of doing that. So if the ox dies, the owner of the ox only has recourse to the body of the cow to get that value of half his damages, which is what the owner of the goring animal would pay. So if the fetus, which has some value, you could sell it for its meat, if the fetus was part of the cow at the time that the cow gored the ox, then the injured party can also take money, from the value of the fetus. But if it was born before the goring happened, then it wasn't part of the mother's body, and the injured party does not have recourse to the fetus in getting paid for the damages. And again, in the absence of a knowable situation where the uncertainty is absolute, they're not going to split that difference, according to Symmachos. Rather, going to say, well, the burden rests on the plaintiff trying to get the money, the injured party. He can't prove it, so we're not going to use that in the calculation of damages. Alternatively, the phrase, "This is the significant principle of monetary law." Okay, so about this phrase, "This is the significant principle of monetary law." The Gemara asks, why do I need the rabbis to say the words, "This is the significant principle of monetary law"? Why didn't they just say, in cases of monetary law, the burden is on the plaintiff to prove that he's owed this money? Why does the Gemara include this phrase? Why do the rabbis include this phrase, "This is the significant principle of monetary law"? And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to say these words because even in a case where the injured party states, "I am certain that such and such occurred," and the one liable for the damage says, "Well, perhaps it was otherwise," without definitively refuting the claim against him, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Although the injured party claims with certainty that he is correct, and the defendant's claim is only speculative, the definite claim still does not render the defendant liable to pay absent proof. Now remember, the injured party, the owner of the dead cow, right, maybe he saw the ox gore his cow and the fetus emerge afterwards. So he's like, "I am sure, I saw it." But he's a single witness, right? And of course he's biased because he's the plaintiff in the case. So the fact that he's certain is in no way dispositive. The other party, the owner of the goring ox, who wasn't even there, he's not making any kind of a claim with certainty. He's not making any of a claim at all. He's just asking a question. He's just saying, "I don't know. Could have happened a different way. I've seen stillborn fetuses that look like this, that were just born that way. I don't know that this happened because of the goring. Prove it." Right? Bring another witness or two, or give me some kind of scientific evidence that shows that this was what happened. And in the absence of that, the plaintiff is not going to get those extra damages because he's not able to prove it. Alternatively, the phrase, "This is the significant principle of monetary law," was necessary for the instances such as this, as it was stated in the case of one who sells an ox to another, and the ox is found to be one that habitually gores. Rav says that this is considered to be a mistaken transaction, since the purchaser can claim that he bought the ox specifically for labor, and an ox that gores is not suitable for such tasks. And Shmuel says, well, the seller can say to him, "I sold it to you for slaughter, and the fact that it gores is immaterial." So the Gemara asks, why are Rav and Shmuel speculating about the purpose of the sale? But let us simply see if the purchaser is a person who buys oxen for plowing or a person who buys oxen for slaughter. And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary for them to engage in a dispute in the case of a person who buys oxen for both this and for that, right? A person who deals in oxen, sometimes he buys them to be slaughtered as beef, and sometimes he buys them to be used as labor for pulling the plow. And we don't know, just from the fact that he purchased which one he wanted. And so if it turns out that it was a gorer, and he says, hey, I purchased this bull for labor, I want my money back. And the seller says, well, I thought you were purchasing it for slaughter, and it doesn't matter that it's a goring bull. Now we have this dispute between Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara asks, but let us see what the purchase price was. If he paid the price of an ox fit for plowing, which is a large amount of money, then it can be assumed that it was intended for plowing. But if he paid the price of an ox for slaughtering, which is a much smaller amount, it can be assumed that it was sold for slaughtering. So the Gemara answers, no. It is necessary for them to engage in this dispute in a case where the cost of meat rose and an ox purchased for slaughtering stands at the same price as an ox purchased for plowing. In that case, Rav and Shmuel dispute whether the purchaser can claim that the transaction was made in error, or whether the seller can claim that he sold it to be slaughtered and the purchaser must provide proof for his claim. So the sages said, and now we're on page 46b, but if the loss to the purchaser cannot be reimbursed from the purchasing money by returning it, for example, if the seller spent it already, let the purchaser take the ox itself in lieu of the money. As people say, allow yourself to be repaid by your debtors, even in bran, since anything may be used as payment for a debt. Bran being a very low quality grain. So in the event that the seller has no money with which to reimburse the purchaser, even if it is a mistaken transaction, the result may be that the purchaser keeps the ox in lieu of having his money returned. So accordingly, there would be no practical difference between the opinions of Rav and Shmuel. But the Gemara answers, no. It is necessary for them to engage in a dispute where the seller does have sufficient funds from which to repay the purchaser, and the purchaser demands that his money be returned as opposed to keeping the ox as payment. Right? Remember, the case is the purchaser claims he was purchasing an ox to be used for labor. He received a muad. He received not necessarily a muad. Right? It's not that it has been declared a goring ox, according to witnesses, etc., but it turns out to have the behavior of a habitually goring ox. Okay, it hasn't been testified about that yet, but the behavior is obvious enough that the seller surely knew that this was an ox that tends to gore, and that makes it inappropriate for labor, much only appropriate for slaughter. So the purchaser says, I want my money back. Right, and what we've said so far is, well, it should be obvious. And the seller says, what are you talking about? You didn't tell me you were purchasing it for labor. I thought you were purchasing it for slaughter. I'm not going to give you your money back. So they've argued so far that, well, we should be able to know. Is it the type of person that normally buys oxen for labor? Well, sometimes he buys for labor, sometimes he buys for slaughter. Did he pay the price of an ox for labor, which is normally much higher than a price for slaughter? Well, the market is such that we can't tell. The price stands at about the same amount. So, what difference does it make if he's going to keep the ox anyway, but now that there's no money? But there is money. The seller has money. He has what with which to reimburse the purchaser. So, who has the burden of proof? The purchaser wants his money back. So he's going to have to prove that this was a mistaken transaction. Now, does he have to prove that I told that guy I needed it for labor? Or is he going to have to prove that I wanted it for labor? And that's enough. In my mind, I was buying for labor. And if I had known that I was going to receive a goring ox, which is suitable only for slaughter, I wouldn't have purchased it. Now, what kind of a burden of proof is that? So let's keep reading. So the Gemara now explains the logic of Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that this is a case of mistaken transaction. Due to the principle, follow the majority. And the majority of people buy oxen for labor, for plowing. And Shmuel says that the seller can say to him, I sold it to you for slaughtering, and we do not follow the majority in this case. When do we follow the majority according to Shmuel? Only in determining the prohibited or permitted status of an item, right? I get a steak from one of 10 butchers in the market. And later I hear, oh, did you know that one of those butchers lost his kosher status? So if you bought from the wrong butcher, then that steak cannot be eaten. It's not kosher for Jews. Okay, well, there are 10 butchers in the market. I bought from one of them. If I bought from the wrong one, this is prohibited. But 9 out of 10, 90% probability, I bought it from one of the butchers that still has his kosher status. So in that situation, at least according to some opinions, you could say that it's still kosher meat. The uncertainty is very unlikely to be that I got an unkosher meat. But that's only when with respect to prohibited or permitted status of an object, right? Prohibited or permitted for eating in this example that I just dreamed up. Though we use that example in other places in the Talmud. But when we're talking about extracting money from a defendant in a litigation, then, says Shmuel, we don't go according to the majority. Rather, the burden of proof is on the claimant. So that which Rav Yehuda stated above, that the Mishnah follows the opinion of Sumakos, is also taught in a Baraisa. In the case of an ox that gores a cow, and its fetus is found dead at its side, and he does not know whether it gave birth before the ox gored or if it gave birth after the ox gored it, the owner of the ox pays half the cost of the damage of the cow and 1/4 of the cost of the damage of the offspring. This is the statement of Sumakos, the minority opinion. The rabbis say the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. So, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, from where is it derived that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant? Where do we get this principle that seems to be the operative principle in litigation of monetary matters? Where do we get that principle? Meaning, from where in the Torah do we derive that principle? As it is stated in the Torah when Moses appointed Aaron and Hur to judge the people. Whoever has a cause, let him come near, yigash, to them, right? Let him approach. Let him come near to them, yigash. That's Exodus 24:14. And this is interpreted to mean that whoever has a claim against another should submit, yagish. Right? So the vowelization is different, but the consonants are the same, which is what matters in Hebrew, since the Torah is written without vowels. Right? So yigash and yagish are essentially the same word. And so we can say that the Torah chose that particular word in that context to convey both meanings. And this is to let you know that when you say whoever has cause, let him come near, you're also implying whoever has cause, let him submit his proof. According to this interpretation, this verse demonstrates clearly that the claimant is responsible for supplying the proof. That's what you would want, right? You don't want such a litigious society where anybody who can raise a question triggers an investigation which the judge and the cops have to go conduct the investigation. You want that the plaintiff is going to bring proof. Now, maybe there's going to be further investigation that needs to be done, but you don't want people creating litigation without bringing some good proof. Now, Rav Ashi objects to this. Why do I need a verse to derive this principle? It is based on logical reasoning. He's not objecting to the principle. He says we know this principle not from a verse, but through logic. It is based on logical reasoning that one who suffers from pain goes to the doctor. And just as here the individual with the problem has the responsibility to resolve it, so too someone with a claim against another must bring a proof to corroborate his claim. Right? In other words, if you went to the doctor because something's wrong with you, you would start by saying, "Doctor, I have a pain in my arm. Doctor, I have a pain in my stomach. doctor, my hair isn't what it used to be. Whatever the problem is, you tell the doctor, and then he proceeds to investigate and study, go deeper, and then tell you, what is the treatment for that. But if you just went to the doctor and said, here I am. What, he has to figure out what's wrong with you without you helping him? That would be a pretty unproductive doctor visit. Likewise, one who goes to court to get money, he has to say what it is that he's looking for and why he believes he's entitled to it, i.e., show the evidence. So, rather, the verse, right? So Rav Ashi is saying the verse that you're talking about is needed for something different, right? That those who have whoever has a cause, let him come near, and that also implies whoever has a cause, let him submit proof. Says Rav Ashi, we need that verse to teach something different. Rather, the verse is needed for that which Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avu says. As Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avu says. From where is it derived that a court first attends only to the arguments of the claimant and only afterward attends to the counterclaims of the defendant and discusses them? Counterclaims meaning not you say I owe you $100 and here's why I believe I don't owe you $100. That's not a counterclaim, right? That's arguing the case. A counterclaim is not only do I not owe you $100, you owe me $1,000. I wasn't going to bring it up. But now that you brought me to court to sue for $100, now I'm going to sue you for the $1,000 that you owe me from this other thing that came up last year, right? So that's what a counterclaim is. So what they're saying here is, well, we won't get into that. That's a new story, a new case. We're not going to start with that. He said, you owe him $100. We're going to litigate that. All right, so as Rav Nachman says, the Rabbi Bar Abba says, from where is it derived that the court first attends only to the arguments of the claimant and only afterward attends to the counterclaims of the defendant and discusses them? As it is stated, whoever has a cause, let him come near, yigash, to them, which is interpreted to mean that whoever has a claim against another should submit, yagish, his claim to them first before the defendant. So the sages of Nehardea say that despite this principle, sometimes a court attends to the defendant first and listens to his defense before discussing the arguments of the claimant. What are the circumstances where this occurs? This occurs in a case where his assets are depreciating because of the claim against him. In that situation, the court allows him to present his arguments first so that he can sell his assets at their true price, right? When it's a time-sensitive matter, okay, we'll do the time-sensitive matter first. Otherwise, we start with the argument and counter-argument to the claim that was brought. New subject. The Mishna, our Mishna, teaches, and likewise in the case of a cow that gored an ox. And the cow's newborn offspring was subsequently found at its side. Half the cost of the damage is paid from the cow, and 1/4 of the cost of the damage is paid from the offspring. So the Gemara asks, the Mishnah's wording indicates that the owner of the cow pays half the cost of the damage, right? Because this cow that gored was a tom. It was innocuous. It hadn't gored in the past. So when it gored this ox, and let's say it either injured or killed the ox, the owner of the ox has recourse only to the body of the cow to be paid his damages that he suffered because the cow gored the ox. Now let's say that the ox is more valuable than the cow. It's a big, strong, plowing ox, and this was like a mid-sized cow, and so and he's only entitled to half the damages. And the cow is not even worth half the value of the ox. So he's looking to get more money out of this situation so that he's not even going to be made whole. He's only entitled to half damages because it was an innocuous cow. But at least he should get the full amount of those half damages. And the cow is not even worth that much. But if the cow, which now has a calf right next to it, if the calf, at the time that the cow gored the ox, if that calf wasn't born yet and it was part of the mother's body, then it seems that the injured party will have recourse to the calf, right? But if the calf was born before the cow gored the ox, well, then it wasn't part of the mother's body when it gored the ox, and the injured party will not have recourse to the calf. So let's see. So likewise, the case of a cow that gored an ox, and the cow's newborn offspring was subsequently found at its side. So half the cost of the damage is paid from the cow, and 1/4 of the cost of the damage is paid from the offspring. And the Gemara asks, the Mishnah's wording indicates that the owner of the cow pays half the cost of the damage and an additional 1/4 of the cost of the damage, thereby amounting to 3/4 of the cost of the damage. And this is difficult to understand, as the owner of the cow is only required to pay half the cost of the damage, since the ox is innocuous. If the Mishnah states that he pays 3/4 of the cost of the damage, what is its purpose? Well, that's not the right reading. Abaye said the phrase half the cost of the damage actually means 1/4 of the cost of the damage. Since there are two animals that may have been accomplices in the incident, the owner of the cow pays only half of the normal amount of the value of the cow, of the ox, i.e. 1/4 of the cost of the damage. And the other half of the payment, which is 1/4 of the cost of the damage, should be paid from the value of the calf, the newborn, who is the accomplice of the cow. Yet, due to the uncertainty of whether it was born before the goring or afterward, only half of that amount is paid from it, which is 1/8 of the cost of the damage. Therefore, the owner of the ox receives a total of 3/8 of the cost of the damage, rather than the half that he would have gotten if it was a normal case. But the Gemara asks, whoa. But if the cow and the offspring are owned by one person, the injured party can indeed say to the owner of the cow, well, whichever way you look at it, give me half the cost of the damage, either from the value of the cow or the newborn, because they both belong to you. Why is it necessary to give half of the payment specifically from the cow and half of the payment specifically from the newborn? Rather, this ruling of the Mishnah is not necessary except for the case where the cow belongs to one person and the offspring belongs to a different person. And so each can claim that he is only partially responsible for the damage. So the Gemara asks, wait, even in this case, if the injured party came forward and claimed payment from the owner of the cow first, he can indeed say to the owner of the cow, your cow certainly caused damage to my property, so you bring me proof that you have a partner. The owner of the cow would then have to prove that the newborn calf was still a fetus at the time and therefore a partner in the incident in order to exempt himself from paying the entire payment of half the cost of the damage. So rather, the case of our Mishnah is one where the injured party claimed payment from the owner of the offspring first. As in this case, the owner of the cow can say to him, since you claim payment from the owner of the newborn, you thereby disclose your opinion on the matter, that I have a partner who is responsible for part of the damage. Therefore, I am not prepared to pay the full amount required, i.e. half the cost of the damage, but only half of that amount, meaning 1/4. Now, there are those who say, even though the injured party came forward and claimed payment from the owner of the cow first, the latter can dismiss his claim, the owner of the cow, as the owner of the cow can say, I know that I have a partner in this matter, i.e. the owner of the newborn calf. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. So Rava said, in challenging Abaye's explanation, is that to say that the Mishnah teaches 1/4 of the cost of the damage and 1/8 of the cost of the damage? Mishnah doesn't say anything about 1/4 and 1/8. The Mishnah teaches half the cost of the damage and 1/4 of the cost of the damage. So rather, Rava said, this is what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is referring to a case where the cow and its offspring belong to one person. And this is what we are saying. The law is that with regard to damage caused by an innocuous animal, restitution is paid only from the money realized by selling the belligerent animal. Therefore, if the cow is here, half the cost of the damage is paid from the value of the cow itself. If the cow is not here, for example, it went astray, only 1/4 of the cost of the damage is reimbursed from the offspring. And the Gemara infers, and we're at the top of 47a, the Gemara infers, according to Rava, the reason for paying only 1/4 of the cost of the damage is that we do not know if the offspring was with it as a fetus when the cow gored or whether it was not. But if it is obvious to us that the offspring was inside the cow as a fetus at the time that the cow gored the ox, then the full amount of half the cost of the damage may be reimbursed from the offspring if the cow is not there. And the Gemara comments, in this respect, Rava conforms to his line of reasoning, as Rava says, in the case of a cow that caused damage while it was pregnant, the injured party collects compensation from its offspring, i.e. the offspring that had been a fetus at the time of the goring. And what is the reason? It is because it is considered an integral part of its body and therefore may be used to collect payment. By contrast, in the case of a chicken that caused damage, the injured party does not collect compensation from its egg. Why? Because payment can be collected only from the body of the hen. So what is the reason? The egg of a chicken is considered a secretion and not an integral part of the hen's body. Right? And indeed, the chick inside the egg, won't form unless it's a fertilized egg, and there has to be an incubation period outside of the mother's body. Whereas the calf inside of the mother's body, is becoming a fully developed calf that at the time of its birth, when it emerges, it already did all of its development and maturation to become a viable offspring. It did that while it was inside the mother's body. And so it's so interesting that this pregnant cow that gores an ox, the injured party will have recourse to the body of the calf for damages if it is provable that the calf was a fetus at the time of the goring. That's what we've got for us today. Let's take a few questions. Tom, what is the Hebrew for bullock with regard to the sacrifices? Okay, so a bullock, I think, is also, I was in that article that I read, where it was talking about the English meanings of words. I'm not a farmer. When we talk about a bullock, so you always have to be careful because, for different translations into English, will assign different English words to Hebrew words, right? So every translation is not the same. But this word bullock, I'm sure people are rushing to the comments who know better than me what a bullock generally means. But a bullock, a castrated male bovine used for producing beef is called either a steer or a bullock. Okay, so generally speaking, when we're talking about castrated males that are being used for beef, right, to become meat, there we would call that in English a steer or a bullock, right? So you're using a bullock in the sacrificial realm because it's going to be sacrificed, right? It's not going to be worked. But remember that when we're talking about castrated, that's not going to apply to animals owned by Jews because it is prohibited in the Torah to castrate our animals. So hopefully that answers the question. John, so what word is usually used for a sacrifice? Probably a para, right? Just a male cow. I don't think so. You're talking about like the Yom Kippur bull, right? The Yom Kippur bull. I'm guessing it's probably called a par, but I just don't remember offhand. Jonathan Hobbs. I was thinking about oxen in terms of their worth as labor, sort of like a tractor, by sentient and dangerous. They were really important, not just a producer of meat or milk. So it explains a little why they're so focused on giving the ox 3 chances. Since you may think that an ox who kills a person or other livestock should be put down immediately due to safety. Exactly right. What is this talk that you might not put it down immediately? Now, if it kills a person, it will be put down immediately, right? But if it injures, it won't. Right? And so that's where we really get to that muad, that it has gored, on 3 instances. You think, like, how could they allow that? But, in that kind of a society, when a goat is very valuable, a sheep is very valuable, an ox, that's major league value. Like a poor person, who uses his ox to plow his field, like he can't replace that ox very easily. So we're going to be very cautious about labeling his ox a muad, and telling him, according to what was the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that once it's a muad, a goring ox, even if it hasn't killed, it ought to be slaughtered. That is a heavy judgment to make on a poor person who only owns one ox. So thank you for that point, Jonathan. Joseph, are the sages saying this monetary principle is the overall monetary principle, or in regard to oxen? No, it's the overall monetary principle when we're talking about litigation, right? That when you're talking about bringing someone to court and you're suing for some kind of damages or payment of restitution, payment of a contract, a creditor, it could be a borrower lender law, whatever it is, you're coming to a rabbinic court to get paid, you want money from the defendant, the burden of proof rests on the claimant, on the plaintiff. And finally, Sharon, Nina says, others also asked this question. The calf is considered an accomplice? What is the justification for considering a newborn calf as an accomplice? Simply that it was part of the mother's body at the time that the mother gored. And the reason that matters is because in the case of the innocuous ox or the innocuous cow, the injured party is only going to get half damages and only has recourse to the body of the animal that injured, right? So that would be the cow in this case. Now, if you could show that the calf, which is now standing there, was a fetus inside the mother at the time of the goring, and let's say that the mother died or went astray, disappeared, and so only the calf is there. Well, if the calf was born before the goring, it's not an accomplice. It has nothing to do with the goring, and you don't have recourse to that. And so since the mother's gone, the injured party is out of luck. But if it can be shown that this young calf was actually a fetus at the time of the goring, and now the mother's gone, now the injured party can say, well, that calf was inside its mother when the mother gored my ox. She was part of the mother's body, or he was part of the mother's body. Therefore, I can seize that calf now to at least get some compensation toward that half damages that I am owed. So accomplice is just kind of a colorful word that's being used in the translation, or partner, whatever. But really what we're saying is it was inside the mother's body, and that's why we have recourse to it now for damages. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific.